This is African News. I'm Rochelle Ferguson with the top stories on the continent. The headlines. Nigerian officials say they're investigating a mass kidnapping after at least 60 women and children were seized in the northeast state of Borno. South African union leaders say a 5-month strike against the world's biggest platinum producers is over, ending a stoppage that's battered the country's economy. And as the Elephants prepare to battle Greece to secure their place in the next round at the World Cup, a village in Ivory Coast has been named after footballer Didier Drogba. But first, South African union leaders say a 5-month strike against the world's biggest platinum producers is over, ending a stoppage that's battered the country's economy. Unions are set to sign the agreement on Wednesday, which will mean the strike is officially over, with miners reporting back to work the same day. Following a lengthy standoff, all 3 major platinum producers agreed to wage increases that vary according to worker categories. Shelley Sitborn has the full story for us.
They've waited for this moment for 5 long months. South African miners working for the platinum industry have led their country's longest strike in decades, sacrificing their salaries to get better wages and working conditions. Their main demand, setting minimum wage at 12,500 rand or 850 euros per month. That's a 150% raise. After a long struggle, their 3 production companies offered to increase the lowest salaries by 20% every year for 3 years in a row. When union leaders presented the offer, 30,000 miners urged them to sign.
I want to thank God for the 5-month strike. It wasn't easy. Some families were broken, but we won because we knew what we were fighting for, and we had God on our side.
We made a wound, a very terrible wound to South African economy. Now we are ready to heal that wound.
The strike has hit the South African economy, pushing it into contraction in the first quarter for the first time in 5 years. To persuade miners to go back to work, production companies posted on a dedicated site this meter showing how much money strikers are losing by the minute. This indicator will eventually freeze, as workers are due to pick up their tools again on Wednesday. Production is expected to regain normal speed by several weeks or months. South Africa is the world's biggest platinum exporter.
Nigerian officials say they're investigating a mass kidnapping after at least 60 women and children were seized in the northeast state of Borno, where Boko Haram Islamists abducted over 200 schoolgirls 2 months ago. Officials are looking into reports that suspected insurgents raided 3 villages 60 miles from the state capital, Maiduguri, over the weekend. Boko Haram initially focused on government and security targets, as well as churches and Muslim leaders that rejected its brand of Islam. But recently, it's increasingly targeting civilians. Well, meanwhile, Nigerian authorities say unidentified gunmen killed at least 38 people, again, mostly women and children, following raids on 2 villages in the northern state of Kaduna. The attack reportedly happened late on Monday in the village of Fadan Karshi and Nandu. Also on Monday, an explosion at a medical college in the northern city of Kano killed at least 8 people and wounded 12. That's according to police. Well, next, the US says Sudan has not rearrested a woman who was freed from prison after a court overturned her death sentence for apostasy. Sources said earlier that Miriam Ibrahim and her husband Daniel Wani were detained as they tried to leave Sudan. Western countries held the decision on Monday not to implement the death penalty after a court initially ruled the 27-year-old had abandoned her Muslim faith by marrying a Christian man. The US is said to be trying to help her leave Sudan. Egypt's president has refused to interfere in a Cairo court ruling to jail 3 journalists for 7 years. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's decision comes as widespread protests are staged in solidarity with the Al Jazeera journalists. The US has called on el-Sisi to pardon them as they were convicted of aiding the now banned Muslim Brotherhood movement and spreading false news. Well, Chris Doyle is the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. He joins me now. Chris, good evening to you. Now, clearly an angry international reaction to this, but it's also something of a snub to the US Secretary of State.
certainly is. John Kerry was there in Cairo on Sunday, the day before these verdicts came out for these journalists, and he announced that the United States would be unlocking the military aid that it had frozen since last year when Mohammed al-Morsi was ousted from power. Now, for him then to go to Iraq and discover that this ridiculous verdict had been issued, when he himself had specifically mentioned the need for freedom of the press, freedom of opinion, is obviously Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President Sisi, basically showing two fingers to the United States and saying that Egypt is independent. I'm going to do what I need to and wish to do. So it's not only a problem for the United States, it's also a problem for senior European countries that have major relations, such as Britain. And it was only a few weeks ago that the Foreign Secretary was congratulating Sisi on winning the presidential elections. So how are these countries going to react? How are they going to put pressure on the Egyptian regime to move forward in a democratic path and, importantly, in the rule of law? And are they going to get these journalists released?
So, Chris, with this firm stance from President Sisi, what implications do these sentences have for the broader state of human rights in Egypt?
Well, this is the point that is sometimes missed, because there are systematic violations of human rights abuses. And, of course, this is a high-profile case that involves international journalists. But there have been huge numbers of lightning trials of Egyptians. Only a few days ago, on the 21st of June, an Egyptian court confirmed 183 out of the 683 provisional death sentences that have been handed down to Egyptians. Now, this has been something that's been going on for months. There clearly is no due process. We have seen other journalists arrested. I think there is now 15 journalists detained within Egypt. Clearly an attempt to stymie the climate of debate, to end any criticism of the regime, and to intimidate the media. So there is a massive human rights issue, and many Egyptians fear that it's a return to the security state that Hosni Mubarak had when he was president, before he was forced to resign in 2011.
OK, Chris Doyle, thank you. That's where we leave it for now.
Thank you.
Ivory Coast is set to play a decisive match in just a few moments' time. Following a win against Japan and a loss against Colombia, the Elephants need to beat Greece to secure their place in the next round of the World Cup tournament. Meanwhile, though, in Ivory Coast itself, a village has decided to name itself after the team's star player, Didier Drogba. Our correspondents took a trip to Drog-Bakra.
A rather peculiar leader for an equally peculiar village. Welcome to Drog-Bakra. Here, every time there's a match, residents ring bells and toot horns in honor of the football star and their idol, Didier Drogba.
My entire life revolves around Drogba. I live Drogba, so much so that I named my son Didier Drogba. He also goes by Ngasam Tito, which is Drogba's nickname. So we have the spitting image of Drogba right here. I barely sleep. I've been watching all the major television channels and listening to every radio station just to get any tidbit of news about what's happening, day by day, minute by minute, in the life of Drogba.
Augustin discovered his idol in 2006 while watching a match. Since then, he says he's dedicated his life to Drogba. In Augustin's home, it's Drogba mania, with T-shirts, books, and clippings. His only regret, he says, is having never met the football star.
I absolutely need to meet him. May God help me make that happen. It would make me so happy. I'd know that I haven't loved him for nothing.
In Drog-Bakra, everyone hopes that the 36-year-old team captain will be taken off the bench for Ivory Coast's next match against Greece.
I hope he'll start the game. We're counting on him. My bet is that we'll win 3-0 with Drogba scoring 2 of those goals.
Nothing like an impromptu djembe session to pass the time until the match. One that these Ivorians hope will allow their team to move on to the World Cup's final 16.
OK, your Africa team is back in 45 minutes time. Up next is Mark Owen with international news.